it doesn't matter. It's such a small thing that if it has to go to them, they will deal with it. If we change the dollar amount, that might change the answer. But I think it's much more likely that it would have to go there. And again, that doesn't really matter. But it would give people, anybody out there, an opportunity to come in and testify about it. But
I won't die on my sword over it. I was just thinking round numbers are easier to work with. And, you take Pivot Bio. And there's a whole host of these things out there. And there's
a Pivot Bio?
Oh, it's, you pour in your fertilizer. I think that one goes in a fertilizer. Some goes in a seed hopper, some goes in your spray tank. They're all used in different ways. Some's an additive to fertilizer, some's there's over 4,000 of them. And so this bill is nationwide to put some kind of control on them nationwide, so they have to be somewhat verified that, that they might work if you get a week of good sunshine and rain at the right time at
The right amount.
the right amount. I'm a skeptic on these things, but there are people that use them and people that will swear they work, and that's fine. And I just, said $85. I'm not making 100, but I mean, if that's gonna trigger all these to delay it, I don't want to delay it.
let's ask legislative council to come up to the table and join this conversation about this miscellaneous ag bill. And Mike, I think the first question was, and maybe you have already had a chance to think about this, or maybe not, but will this bill, as it's drafted, need to go to Ways and Means?
Yes.
Okay. So that,
Yes, well, I mean, I'm just wondering, conforming language with no change to fees still,
You're expanding the universe of products that are subject to a fee, so you are increasing revenue to the state.
how are we expanding the universe when we're?
Because there are 2 or 3, the desiccants are being added.
so we're replacing those 3 existing terms wherever they exist with beneficial substances. But the universe of beneficial substances is more than just those 3.
Yes, well, remember, you're adding the definition of desiccant and including them as beneficial substances. So, and the clerk, from prior experience, she will say that you're creating more revenue.
Okay. Yeah.
First, they look for a dollar sign. They literally search for a dollar sign.
Bill.
Yeah. And then they look for the word fee or fine or payment. And then they just try to determine whether or not there's any revenue that's generated. I think there's an argument that there is revenue generated.
So there would certainly be a new revenue generated if we increased the $85 to something more than that. And it was, so this was brought up, I think, in an earlier meeting, or somebody mentioned it at some point, a possibility. Before we move ahead and vote on the bill, we can talk about that if folks have a strong feeling about it.
Question for Mike, the ledge council. Have a lot of these substances already the fees charged to them, or is this a whole new?
But that's actually a really good question. It's like when some of the plant biostimulants were coming in, there was a question of whether or not A&R Agency of Ag had already been collecting, and they have been collecting for some, but not for all.
Okay, so,
So you probably have the same dynamic with the desiccants, and they probably have been collecting for some. Really, it's probably the manufacturer has been registering,
yeah,
and some have not. So plant inoculants are not the desiccants. The inoculants are the ones that are new. Page 7, 10 to 12. Thank you. And then there's the other inoculant. So
Like what are those two things?
what are the inoculants?
A desiccant.
They're basically microorganisms to be applied to the plant or the soil. And enhance the uptake of the plant nutrient.
And desiccants already were part of the universe.
Yes.
universe.
As in, they already are falling under the umbrella of.
So it's plant inoculant and soil inoculant. So page 7 and page 8 are new terms.
Of those previous three are desiccants under. If we were, biostim.
I will have to figure that out.
Which we're gonna ask you.
I may have just used the wrong term.
When I think of inoculants, I think of seed treatment, rhizobia, sulfur and stuff.
So the other word you used was desiccant.
That's good sort of drying agent.
That's a drying agent, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Desiccant.
You know, Katie?
Like desiccant.
While Mike is researching.
Yeah.
But I was driving in this morning around 7. There's a whole thing they discovered about these nitrogen in the oceans. They finally at Santa Cruz found out that it may be the savior for agriculture. These things that are all over, I never knew where they came from. Actual organism. It's been coupled with a new cell many years ago.
That hold nitrogen.
Yes, it hold nitrogen for soil. I don't know whether it be an inoculant or it's called public radio.
So, Greg, did you have a?
Chairman, I can ask you to, and one thing I just want to make sure, and Bill, and I need to do some more study myself, I think, probably, but just want to make sure to negatively impact typical fertilizers that farmers are using, you know, like NPK stuff.
No change. No change.
So yeah, and we can have Mike put the language back up, and I think we can look, if anybody wants to pull it up too, there's no bill number for this because it's bill that we're creating, but it's on, it's under Mike's name, and is it posted today? Is it on? Yeah, I don't see it today, but
That's what it's at, but
yeah,
it is posted.
it is today. Thank you.
Yeah,
But not with any amendments, just the original.
Yeah,
there's no change to fertilizer, and if there's already fees associated with a bunch of them, then I would back off on my quest.
okay.
See if there's, as you said, Michelle. Yeah. I thought the whole thing was relatively new.
Okay.
It's just adding on the rest.
And I think we're So while we're waiting, Mike, are you still digging? Because I can keep talking.
I cannot find desiccant in the statute, but it's largely because my internet isn't working. I have to always remind myself how to spell desiccant.
How do you spell it?
I think it's DESICCANT.
Is it not double S? It's not desiccant. Yeah, it is desiccant.
If we're going to try and take a vote on this, Jed, are you prepared with the paperwork to do that?
There's two Cs, one S.
Maybe shouldn't.
I'm sorry, desiccants are regulated under. They're regulated under insecticides, fungicides, and rodenticides, and not this chapter, sorry.
So no desiccants. Okay.
No desiccants on those.
Does JFO need to do a estimate of
They might be asked
expanding the
to.
universe, what this brings in?
They might be asked to, yeah.
And the agency of ag may be able to handle that question very quickly.
The fiscal impact.
Mhm.
Mike, can you just confirm Representative Burt's question about fertilizer being affected at all by this availability or price or anything?
So they already have to pay a fee to register their product. And if it's it's a loose product per ton, they also have a tonnage fee. None of that is changing. So, and nothing is changing that would prohibit any type of fertilizer from being sold. So they already register, they already pay their fees. If it's not packaged, if it's on, they already pay tonnage fees. It's, and nothing about the composition is changing.
I think I asked this earlier, Mike, but, and you might know, Richard, since you use these things, are there sort of like multivitamins essentially? So like a fertilizer with inoculants or with stimulants that come with it, and then does it go into the fertilizer category? Does it?
You still have to register, right? So and then it's about the composition of your product and the claims on your product, because your product claim has to be valid. You cannot be making false claims on your product label or in your materials, and that's something that the agency has. So if you have mixed product, you have to register, and if you're making claims about what it does, those claims need to be accurate. Can't be short packaged. Everything that's required on the label needs to be on the label.
But there must be a sort of hierarchy at the agency of what it's classified at. Like, for example, like
But I think that,
corn seed with
right.
mix on it, right? Treated article, even if it had an inoculant, it would still end up in the pesticide branch of things.
So if it's got anything that's being held out to kill organisms, that's a pesticide.
Would I still have to register it for the inoculant then, or it all?
No, you're going to register that as a pesticide, pesticidal product.
So I was just wondering, then the next, if not, no pesticide, but if it has a fertilizer and an inoculant.
Well, then that's the beauty of what's being done here. It's a beneficial substance, right? It just has to register. And pay the fee. You don't have to, because beneficial substance is all of those things.
Representative Nelson?
Yeah, Agritain. They spray it on urea. to stabilize the urea. So if you're spreading fertilizer, when we talk dress corn in late June and we have those bright sunny days, hopefully days on end, urea will break down and volatilize. And if you spray it with Agritane, it protects it longer from volatilization. And it's a beneficial substance. So I imagine Agritane would be in this, and it's something that's been around for quite a few years and probably already registered.
Representative Boswell.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I thought we were told that pesticides were not considered beneficial substances.
They're not in this.
Okay,
They're
so-
regulated in a different chapter.
okay. So I just wanted to make sure when we're changing everything to be beneficial substances, that doesn't include
It
pesticides.
doesn't include pesticides.
Okay, just wanted to be sure.
They
Yes.
are beneficial substances.
That's another bill.
I mean, they, in Vermont, they're actually called economic poisons. And- Right? And that's how they were first defined by the feds in the 50s. They were defined as economic poisons, and Vermont has never moved away from that. But
That's where that.
so literally not 6 PSA 911-5. Economic poison means any substance produced, distributed, or used for preventing, destroying, or repelling any insects, rodents, nematodes, fungicides, weeds. That is what gets regulated.
Greg?
Is that the blue urea talked about?
Yeah. Yeah. It's Agritane on. Try not to use it. Costs money.
Mike, fertilizer is not a beneficial substance. It's its own category. It will be.
Economic.
So look at well, look at the definition of beneficial substance, page 2. It's any substance or compound other than primary, secondary, and microplant nutrients, parentheses, fertilizers. So fertilizers are different from beneficial substances. It excludes pesticides, but it includes plant amendments, plant biostimulants, plant inoculants, soil amendments, soil inoculants, and other chemical or biological substances. So this chapter is about regulating fertilizer, which is one category, lime, which is another category, and now beneficial substances.
Lime's also its own. category.
Lime is, yes, lime gets treated differently because of its uses and because of its nature. But you'll see, say, for example, on page 10, Lime pays a smaller fee, registration fee. They register $50 per product instead of $85.
A lot of our lime is mined locally.
Really?
She lime,
Their quarries.
yeah. Delbert.
Shelburne, right, that's right.
Do we have any other questions about Bill for Mike?
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
Biosolids, wood ash that comes from chip burning plants. Does that have its own section statute?
So if you're going to be using ash, it's in here somewhere.
The only reason why that was triggered in my head because you had a separate category for lime too, so.
I have to find, ash is in here, is in this chapter somewhere. Hold on a second.
Yeah, it is different.
Oil or ash.
It's in mind.
60%. Oil or ash. Okay. very alkaline, it's like 12. But without the benefit of calcium.
So lime, and it's basically when wood ash is mixed with lime. So agricultural limes, including agricultural lime mixed with wood ash, are exempt from the tonnage fees. Lime and wood ash mixtures may be registered as agricultural liming materials and guaranteed for potassium or potash. Hold on, the potash is also so potash is a primary nutrient, so it could fall under fertilizer as well. That answer your question?
Yeah, I just curious where those fell in the statute, I guess.
So they would be under this chapter.
But not this subsection or this.
Not a benefit.
Right, it's not.
Yeah.
Not being affected by the
Yeah.
current.
Right. No change, the change is not made.
The chapter title is fertilizer, lime, and beneficial substances.
One,
Or will be when we make the change, yeah. John?
where, do we have a home for, biochar?
I think that's a great question. I don't know where biochar would be. Would biochar be a fertilizer? I'm gonna have to ask the agency about that.
But again, it's not explicitly covered here.
It's not explicitly covered in the chapter, but depending on who you ask, it might have beneficial properties, either as a fertilizer or as a beneficial substance. So I don't know how they would regulate biochar. Has everybody seen biochar? Has Jock's been by your house? So
No.
there's an individual for years that was advocating for the use of biochar for everything, like reducing phosphorus in Lake Champlain and fertilizer and fill. And it's a pretty impressive looking substance, but there was varied opinion on its efficacy.
Does the answer to this question make a difference to anyone in terms of how we would vote on it? We might want to have the bill reporter, Richard, be prepared to answer that question in case somebody else answers it. And in the meantime, we can let committee know what the answer is, but okay.
Biochar.
It'll just keep, before you were on this committee, it came up a
Yes.
lot
Yeah.
in one biennium. I can't remember what that was. And then Marshall Webb, who, drowned in Lake Champlain, he was a big proponent of it. His husband, and now it's kind of disappeared. I'm sure just
Haven't heard
here
it.
it's disappeared, but I think it's still out there. I'm sure we'll come back at some point.
I remember seeing it in the inbox quite a bit, yeah. I think that generally speaking, I'd like to have our votes be when we have a full committee, and Leland had to leave, so there's no rush to do this now. I think maybe we can wait and hold off and do it tomorrow. Not that I think there's anything more we need to know, but just so we have the whole committee.
Okay.
In the afternoon or no?
I don't know. He wasn't sure. Okay, so I think we're all set on this topic then, Mike. I think we'll just be ready to vote it out as is tomorrow.
That's good.
And I don't think we need I don't think we need you to be here for that. We'll be doing it probably at the end of the day, unless we have a full committee later today. We can do it before we leave too. We've asked Kirby to come in now. He's been marking up the current use bills, and if you're not going anywhere else,
I can stay.
you join
I
it.
come here. I think Sid's got me here until noon.
Okay, good.
You want to be here.
while we're waiting for Kirby, I'll just fill you in, Mike, because you drafted a couple of these bills. We've, and maybe you've been talking to
Adam.
offline, yeah. So we've got, I think, well, I don't want to speak for the committee because we haven't had a straw poll. I think there is a feeling that we would like to try and move something tomorrow. And at the same time, recognizing that this is a pretty broad issue and we've opened up a lot of conversations and we don't know the answers to, all the questions. So. Sorry, Kirby, I was sitting in the chair, so I already transitioned into the subject, but yeah. So yeah, I was just saying that where we're at right now, I think is, Kirby's got a draft with some some amended language that captures some of what we've been talking about. The starting point, or it's starting point for more conversation. It doesn't capture everything. We're up against a bit of a clock. We need to recognize that. We need to just be cognizant of other voices that we've heard from and trying to craft something that would be, that would work for as broad an audience as possible. Again, we're dealing with land as a limited resource, and we've been reminded already several times today about competing demands on that resource. So Kirby, do you need access to get in and post?
It just came up.
Okay.
Back to something. That video off. Okay.
Turn ours off too.
So
Little black soda over that. There.
Kirby Keaton, legislative council. I just put together an amendment for you based off of some concepts from H 134, Representative Kimball's bill. But this version, for one thing that it's doing is adapting the tax exemption concept that Representative Kimball had requested to an abatement concept. And I think Jill is here too, and maybe Jill has already discussed with you the benefits of doing that. So that's one thing. And then I also had worked with Representative Bosloon yesterday to come up with some requirement criteria to sort of put a lot of guardrails and to tighten up the use of this new abatement option.
Can you just explain what abatement means in this case?
Sure. Abatement would be land use change tax becomes due and PBR has the ability to forgive that, as opposed to an activity being exempt from tax altogether on the front end. Okay, so shall I walk through?
Please, yeah.
Okay, so this is a committee amendment to H 134. And one thing that hasn't been discussed recently, but I want to just note here, is that the proration for when a portion of a parcel is removed from current use is still there from Representative Kimball's bill. So just don't want that to be forgotten, that's one of the policy changes here.
Something that we want to also look at having you amend, but we'll come back to that.
Okay, so that's there. And then we have, instead of creating a new subsection like before, creating a new exemption, we have language that amends the existing abatement subsection in the land use change tax section. So it's subsection G. Currently, the Commissioner of Taxes can abate land use change tax I want to flag that this is for agricultural land, the way it's written, and I kept it that way. For the new thing we're adding here. So just keep in mind that this is only going to be enrolled ag land that this abatement could be available for. And under current law, abatement exists for disposition of a property resulting in a change of use if it takes place within 5 years of the initial assessment at use value because of the permanent physical incapacity or death of the individual farmer owner or farmer operator of the property. That's current law. And abatement is also currently available for if a disposition of the property was necessary in order to raise funds to continue the agriculture operation of the seller, with some other requirements there. So we would add a third case where PVR could grant abatement for land use change tax. And also keep in mind, as you've been discussing for a while, when land is withdrawn, land use change tax does not immediately become due. It's when development occurs. So in this case, the way it would play out is land could be withdrawn, and it would be when that development later occurs that PBR would come in and look. And if that development meets the requirements that we're about to go through, they can abate the land use change tax instead of impose the land use change tax. Okay. So the leading language is land was withdrawn from use value appraisal to develop affordable housing, and the following requirements are met. And we have a number of requirements here. The first one is not more than 2 acres was withdrawn for the purpose of developing affordable housing. And again, full disclosure, just throwing this together as abatement right now.
Yeah.
This could absolutely be tightened up probably. Second prong here. So this is all of these requirements have to be met. And the taxpayer applying for abatement has not previously received abatement under this subsection G. And I threw in the language there, whether individually or indirectly through a trust or business entity, trying to recognize that sometimes land is held by, let's say you could be a beneficiary of a trust and you could also individually hold some land, and just for it to actually track so that people can't create entities to try to abuse the exemption. Because and this came out of a discussion yesterday with Representative Boss-Loon about trying to limit the use of this thing. So it's one time for a taxpayer in their life, they can use this abatement. It wouldn't be so that you can get into the business of developing current use land or something like that. The next requirement is that the land withdrawn fronts an existing public road. That was from Representative Kimball's language before. And then the fourth requirement is that the land was developed exclusively with one or more of the following types of property. The first one is affordable housing, and we went through that definition yesterday, I believe. That this is your classic traditional affordable housing development, and a couple of other types of development were added after discussion in committee. The first one here is residential property that has a sales price that is not more than 80% of the statewide median sales price for residential properties under 6 acres, as reported by Vermont Department of Taxes. That was taken from the TIF statute, and it's something that's one of the possible ways that something could be measured under TIF. So Jill, again, would be able to speak better than I can to how easily this is verifiable, but it's elsewhere in the law. So that makes me think that this should be something that could be verified when PBR is considering abatement. The next one is kind of a placeholder. It's just property exclusively used for long-term rentals, to be an apartment or something like that. We could probably find a definition for apartments or rentals that's less squishy than that. But that's what we have now. And I did some looking around, but I didn't find anything that was kind of in line with what we were looking for. And then we have a fifth requirement for the abatement, and it says the developed land is within or not more than 1/2 mile from the boundary of a Tier 1A or Tier 1B area established under Title 10. This is the committee's request.
I'm getting a little mixed up on the ors and the ands here. The,
That is the subdivision, little I, 2I. That's part of the big D where one of those three need to take place.
okay,
But one of those three is what makes up the uppercase D subdivision there. And so that's the fifth requirement is the tier 1A or tier 1B. And then the sixth requirement is the development on withdrawn land has a density of not less than 1/2 unit per half acre. I had meant to reach out to my colleague, Ellen Tchaikovsky about this. Because I think the intent was to write something here that lines up with that state minimum zoning that was passed recently, as far as like a certain amount of density must be allowed, and to kind of match it up with that. Representative Bosselin could speak to this as well, but I think the idea from our conversation was you don't want to see 2 acres withdrawn and just have 1 unit there. You want to try to if you're taking ag land out of current use, the committee recognizes that's a big deal, and you want to actually have some density and have like multiple units put in there. So that's what that's trying to get at. As far as administering that from PVR's perspective, could be difficult. And again, Jill could probably speak to that, but because they require possibly some on the ground type work to look into that. So that's something for the committee to think about. If that's a concept you like, and how can that concept be implemented in a way that's going to be workable for administration. And then the last problem here that comes from H134. Originally, there's not been discussion recently in committee about this, but it was, if you recall, Representative Kimball was concerned with not wanting to fragment parcels, but figuring out and defining what exactly that means is something that he wasn't sure about. So this was originally basically placeholder language that he had mentioned when he came in here that he wanted to bring to your attention and have the committee think about. We haven't discussed that much. I kept it there, but the language as it is should not remain that way because it's way too ambiguous.
some clarity.
Yeah.
I'm gonna suggest that we delete G, the highlighted pink highlighted language. If we can, and the point was made earlier today that if subdividing in and of itself is fragmenting. And I think the way that we typically think about fragmentation, forest fragmentation is a little bit different. But I don't know that we can get our heads around what we would actually be trying to accomplish, if we even know what we'd be trying to accomplish by including that language or something like it. If people feel differently, though, fragmentation is a concern.
I agree with.
So I would say, at least for the time being, let's delete that. And if there's a sense that we need to be somehow addressing that, and that there's a way we can do that, open to reconsidering it. But Representative Boston?
Yeah, just a few things. So I spoke with somebody from Vermont Housing Conservation Board, and I've spoken to a couple other leaders of different environmental organizations locally. And I would say in general, there's support for this idea on a very limited basis. And that's what we tried to do, was to make it really limited, not so somebody's going to transition 100 acres of ag land into a condominium, development, but that it's going to make a little bit of housing available in areas where people can be there. But that said, the line 20A, where it says 2 acres is the minimum that's allowed. The person that I spoke with said she thought that 1 acre would be better, which then would mean a maximum of 2 properties would be possible in terms of that extension. So I don't know how the committee feels about that, but I think if our goal is to make a possibility for some housing to happen in a limited capacity in a way that's going to support farmers and farm communities, if 1 acre is going to make it more doable, then I guess I would support changing that language, but I don't know what you folks think.
Well, I think that thank you for passing that along, and we might want to ask again, that organization to come in if they want to testify, so we can hear from them and they can answer questions about
Yep.
why, go into more detail, but, Richard, did you have a reaction or response?
Yeah. To take 1 acre out and make 2 houses on it, on the edge of a village, does not answer the need for more housing in the state of Vermont. And with the idea that we're not building 5,000 square foot homes on this land, we're building ranch homes, or I use ranch as an example, 1,200 square foot homes for entry level housing. I don't remember the gentleman that was on the news a while ago that was talking about the demographics in the state of Vermont. We have to grow our housing by 10% in the next 3 to 4 years.
7.2.
Yes, it was.
I know, tell me.
No, you're not. I'm glad I brought you. Anyway, so to put that kind of an acre restriction, I know, listening to your questions and what you talked about earlier, Michelle, is different than this, although they can be the same. It's, a farmer may have a 10-acre field right in the middle of a town. And there's lots of those, especially up where I live, and I don't own them. They're right in the middle of a town. And he could take that whole field and turn it into residential, entry-level housing. So the intent of 134 is remove some of that burden from entry-level housing.
I want to ask, and I know there are a couple of hands up here, but I want to ask a clarifying question, and it may help us resolve this issue. And it goes back to the ands and the ors. The way that this is drafted, Kirby, are we now only talking about, we would only be talking about parcels in the tier 1 areas? It would that's a requirement?
So there's tier 1A and tier 1B. I included both those in this
Yeah.
draft. If that was not your intent, then yeah, please let me know. And it's drafted so that it's either within those areas or a half mile away from the boundary.
Okay, all right. So, which is, okay, good. So good to know that. I think what we may also want to consider, and we had some conversation about this yesterday, is an or that is incorporating possibly the 1 acre or the 2 acre, and not restricting the tier 1 AB development to 1 acre or 2 acres, but to be more expansive there. So a parcel that meets all of these qualifications in tier 1, tier 2, we're not necessarily going to cap that, or a different cap. And then second, and again, I think I'm just rephrasing what we talked about yesterday, having there be, for parts of the state that are not in one of those areas, the option to do something that is much more restrictive, but to do something. So I have to say that we can talk about the details later. I just want to flag that, but I think that's where we were. Jed and then Greg.
2 questions. One has to do with, I have ag land that's in a 2 acre residential ag district in Morrisville. How does 1 acre, does it overrule local zoning in that regard? If it's a 2 acre district?
This should not overrule local zoning. That's why we were we had discussed trying to match it up with what the statewide minimums are for zoning density.
Because typically there's a 2 acre carve out for a house in current use land.
Right. So again, I didn't get to consult with the attorney on staff who specializes in zoning and land use. But the idea is to make this match up in a way in which in any place in Vermont, it would be allowed.
Second question, it's the triple I's there, property exclusively used for long-term rental. Whereas I was hoping that home ownership could be the goal. You
I
know,
think it could be either.
So that's one of the ors. So the second one would get at home ownership, residential property that has a sales price that is more than 80%.
The median sales price, which you put Stowe in the median, endorse it for the rest of the state, median sales price is quite high.
right, but
It's gonna be in the community you're looking at, I think.
Greg?
So my thoughts on this bill, that the prorate, going back to proration and doing 10% of the prorated value of the land, I think is straightforward. That's gonna be a cost savings for everybody. If we do that, like, so it's, say the smallest piece somebody's gonna have in current use is 25 acres, right? If that's valued at $20,000 an acre, even, that's a $500,000 piece. That's, and if you sell off 2 acres from that, or I put 1 acre because it's near town, right? 1 acre lot. That's only gonna cost, with the proration, it's $2,000 to the project. That's like that's choosing between 2 different front doors right now. On the cost of a project. I don't know why we want to. The main thing is going to totally agree with the prorating it based on, going back to the old form of prorating rather than having to wait for a lister and have the value of that land be skyrocketed in price and then having to pay 10% on that. If we go with the proration, that's straightforward, but to try to jump through all these hoops for 2,000, all we're doing is trying to save $2,000 on a project. When it comes to affordable housing, if we're looking at a 50-unit complex, that's going to be done by Vermont Housing and Conservation. The state's just going to fund those differences. I just don't know where this is eventually going to fit into the puzzle piece of what it's trying to do. It's a lot of extra hoops for the sake of, we're really maxing out at about $2,000 extra cost to a $500,000 project.
Okay, yeah,
I don't know if that came out, I'm not trying to bring a little bit of clarity, but it's a lot of hoops for a little pay.
Can I just ask?
sure, yeah.
So, but it could include parcels of less than 25 acres if they're ag, right?
In current use?
The ones we
Yeah.
talked about, right?
Okay. The ones that
Not bad.
qualify, that are
But I just-
producing $2,000
Right.
worth of product.
Yeah, and I don't know that we know the distribution there, but yes, I think,
The cost per acre is probably gonna be about the same, still with a smaller acreage. In terms of paying a penalty out of, if the main thing is going to prorated versus going based off of a list, That's seems like the main goal.
so I think we should talk about that because I'm not sure we're all in agreement on that. But I do want to just, while we still have Kirby, see whether, because I'm going to send him off to, because Kirby, I know you told me before you had a little bit of free time today, and if that's still the case, I'm going to send you off to see if you can come up with those two different scenarios. So there's the tier 1A, basically what you've got here, but then a second category that gives, more opportunity across the state. A second.
Yeah, to make sure I understand. Basically, what we have here with G removed for parcels that are not in tier 1A or tier 1B, but near.
No, not even a near. So this is,
Okay.
yeah, this is in and near. So that's, I think, what we were looking at, a half mile within tier 1A.
Okay.
But then beyond that, because we have heard testimony that much of the state will not be mapped likely as tier 1A or 1B, and those are exactly areas where we are also, that we need people in those areas too, recognizing that, there is something to be said for trying to develop housing in our downtowns, our existing areas, but I think the idea of the carve out of the acre or the 2 acre was really intended to be more for that second approach rather than this approach. So does that all make sense?
What requirements would you like for the tier 1A and tier 1B?
What are we saying right now? Good question. What are the
What's tier
requirements
1B
right now?
again?
Is that,
What's tier 1B again?
we need Ellen Tchaikovsky to
Yeah.
answer that question. Yeah.
I could pull up a statute.
And we're gonna have the mapping people in today so they can show us on a map. Yeah. I think.
So what we have is the number of acres that could be withdrawn and developed.
No, I think we don't need that restriction.
I'm gonna make a chart for myself.
So the bigger the number is, the more likely we're gonna have resistance from environmental communities in terms of.
Yeah, but I think in our tier 1 and tier 1A and 1B, no one has come to me saying they would resist that.
Okay,
So maybe we will hear that, but I think we can move ahead, assuming that that's a more direct approach.
Okay, so A would only apply to outside. I'm gonna say tier 1 or outside.
Okay,
Okay. B, limitation on how many times that this abatement can be used for one taxpayer.
I think that's also maybe outside. This is not something we had discussed in committee. I think it's an interesting idea. The way you explained it, I think it was to try and restrict somebody from taking 100 acres and just repeatedly dividing it up. When what we were really trying to do in that case was allow somebody to stay on their land. So, I think that makes a certain amount of sense, but I don't know that we had envisioned that being necessary elsewhere. So I would say maybe outside for that one.
Okay.
And we can come back and talk more about this, but just to give you some direction for now. Yeah,
Fronts an existing public road.
that was in the bill.
Yeah, would that work? Would that work, Kirby, if the public road ended here and you wanted to extend the public road?
In the way that I would read this, if the parcel's touching the public road, okay.
Yeah.
The adding more road to say access an apartment complex or something would not affect eligibility here, if that's your question. I think what Representative Kimball had in mind was
Road.
in the middle of farmland,
Yes.
remove that.
Yeah,
And then that would cause more new roads to be built through farmland. And he did not want that as a policy to happen. I'm speaking for him, so hopefully that's correct.
Okay. Great.
And I could just see, in some of these areas that we're talking about doing this tier 1A, 1B, you might have a corner of a piece of land that touches a road. So you really would only be able to take one lot out of that. Potentially, like, say there's 100 feet of road frontage on a piece of land that's 20 acres. We're basically saying that's only gonna be one lot, basically, right? That this would qualify for. Okay.
So we're saying that C would apply in both cases, outside and tier 1?
Yeah.
So the types of housing,
Yeah,
without that, then you would be opening the door to taking land out of current use to build strip mall or whatever.
That was our attempt to address the McMansion issue, to try and find a modest cost for a home. So either by your salary or by the value of the home, it's going to be modest, not a McMansion.
Yeah, okay. So I think we need that. Again, unless it conflicts with the inherent distinction between these two, 1A and outside. Yeah.
Okay, so have that in both.
Okay.
Are there any changes to any of these categories?
Let's go ahead and have you go with that.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing, I'm sorry, yeah.
Oh, no, I was going to continue. So
No, go ahead.
Okay, so obviously we don't need E here because we're going to create distinctions because of E. And so the last part is the density.
Yeah, I think that we don't want that density restriction on a property that's in one of these designated down tier 1 areas.
To clarify, not having this means that you're okay with low density in those areas. You're okay with one unit on 5 acres.
Oh, sorry, I'm misreading it. The development.
Yeah, I know, it can be tricky.
Yeah. Yeah, great.
Well, we don't have a stipulation that it has to have public water and sewer, right? In this,
In tier 1A and B, it would
it would have,
Yeah.
right?
okay,
I'm pretty sure,
that solves that.
but not on the outside ones.
But it's within a half mile. Tier 1B, right?
Yeah, I think the idea there is that the services could be extended theoretically to accommodate new housing construction.
Say, for instance, they couldn't be. I mean, the costs are enormous to do that. We really need a minimum of 1 acre to have septic and well.
Well, what Jamie Fidel, I talked to him, and the Rural Caucus had a project, 9 units in Fairleigh, where there was public water but no public sewer. These tier 1B allows you to find the alternative is suitable soils, and you could have 2 or 3 houses and a portion of land that could support subsurface sewage in a communal system. That Jamie just allowed an hour ago, that's where he lives. I'm familiar with it in Waitsfield, Spring Hill. There's 7 or 8 houses in this have a pump system.
So I think
Adjacent suitable soil.
the question is whether the outside area, which is intended to be in some ways more generous, but not in all ways, whether we're saying this is an either or, whether there's overlap there. And you're drafting it, you may come into situations where it's not clear what we were asking, we can talk about those.
Okay, yeah, so my question here is, especially since now you're talking about inside the tier one areas, you want to be a lot more permissive, including not having an acreage cap, right? Do you want, though, to require density, though, so that inside those areas, someone doesn't have their land use change tax abated for 100 acres because they built one house? Is that the kind of like, are you, yeah,
I was thinking 1 acre. I can't imagine living on half an acre, trying to have a place. Up in my land, everyone's gotta have a snow machine and RTV and a place to keep it and a gutter. Just for example.
But if we're talking about, like say, an acre plot that's, or 10 acres that's in town, that somebody's saying, oh, you can put an affordable housing here. No, I mean, do we want to have a density requirement on that is your question.
right?
Yeah.
Like the way this is drafted, if it's 1 acre, you would need a duplex.
Yeah.
If it's not a duplex, then it would not receive abatement.
I mean, density requirements had not come up. I will say, I appreciate the conversation, but it wasn't something that we had discussed until today. So I'm inclined to leave that out for now. And, there'll be opportunity along the way for people to make changes, and maybe that's one of them.
I don't want that 5 acres or 100 either.
Great.
One clarifying question, because I think the point you brought up was making me question something. So the thing you brought about 100-acre, one house on 100 acres, they could actually avoid the penalty for the whole 100 acres. If we don't add.
From what I'm being asked to draft it right now, yeah, what I'm being asked to draft is if you're tier 1A and B, so far we've got the only requirements are public road and developed exclusively for these residential purposes. But any amount of acreage can be abated.
So
And as long as you've got one of these things on that, then you're fine.
it'd be almost better to put a not greater than 2-acre
Something.
density.
Yeah, whatever policy.
Not less than, do not greater than 2-acre density. So if somebody builds, they can only have 2 acres taken out of 100 that would qualify for this. But then you only have 2 acres.
I think I understand what you're saying, even though,
Because if you say not less than 1/2 what's the density right now?
1/2 acre per house.
That would still open the door for somebody to do 100-acre lot with one house and avoid penalty.
So we don't want that. I know that wasn't anybody's intent. I'm going to suggest that we are running into lunch here, and I want to give people a chance to have. We will be looking at whatever Kirby comes up with, and we can dissect it and say, no, that's not what we meant, or unintended consequence flagging here. Let's deal with that. But I think this has been really helpful. Good discussion. And John.
Can we ask Jill a question or?
Yes, yeah, if Jill's available.
While you're here. Just since we're in abatement land here, that already exists. How does that work? It's when something comes to fruition, then they can apply for abatement, essentially like you're a BCA or a Board of Abatement.
Right, so the Rec Department of right, so in this theory, the development and then the judgment of it meeting the requirements happens and then the abatement happens. Whereas before, if it's an exemption, it's making a lot of assumptions about things that would happen in the future, it could maybe not happen. So this way, it's like a finite point in time. Development has occurred, it meets these requirements, it can be abated. So they would,
There's no deadline then as far as how long it takes you to build your.
Well, that was one of the things I sort of wondered, is there a point in time if something kind of lingers, and that's the other reason why the abatement is a good idea, because maybe you think you're going to, 5 years down the road, you realize it's not feasible or whatever. And you don't end up building what you think you will, we don't then have to backtrack and charge you land use change tax.
Right.
Based on something that didn't happen, maybe you're not gonna do this anymore. So I just think it's a cleaner way, and it basically is what we already can do. You can already withdraw and not develop the land. And then once you commit and you do develop, that's when the change is assessed. And the other thing too is, right, if you withdraw the land, at a point in time, planning on doing this in the future, the land use change tax is calculated at the point you've taken out the program, so you know what it's gonna be. You're not going in blind wondering what it's gonna be.
But to Greg's point, it might be 5 years and you get your $2,000 back, but you paid it up front, right? Because
It's
Seems
rather
like
not
as an-
charge you have to give it back, they'd rather just abate it, it's due. I mean, from an administrative perspective, I'd rather not.
oh, it's a bill that just never gets collected. then.
Right, so like right now, there's a lot of property that's withdrawn and not developed, and the land use change tax has been calculated. And it's sitting in our system, but it's not accruing penalty and interest,
It's not developed.
it's right, it's information for that person, should they choose to remove the lien or should it become developed.
At least these are doing that.
And that'd be the same.
Kirby, can you also incorporate into the next draft the language that we had worked on, you had worked on, dealing with the issue of the land that's subdivided but is still eligible?
Yes, we had that language and I understand that's what you want. We also had the 90 days change. Is that also something you want?
Yeah, the committee, we haven't had a committee conversation, so I'm not sure. I do want to stop now. We're running way into lunch and I can't give any flexibility on the other end of the hour because we're on the floor. So let's stop here. We can, people can stay if they want to, but